Story 1. I clean houses for a living and I try to be communicative with my clients, but especially people who have never had help before tend to feel weird asking for certain things. Ms. B had us for almost a year when she finally showed me a list of all the things I've missed or not known. She is there when we clean. She could have told me at any time but chose to bottle her frustrations up. I had to talk her down from canceling her services and told her, I'm also a human. I miss things, so does the helper. But we are always happy to correct it before we leave and going forward if we know. And somehow we haven't had any issues since. Just talk to me. Story 2. I used to have this guy on my team who refused to ask for time off. He would instead plan a vacation and just call in sick every day. I do not like to ask for doctor's notes, but I have to if someone is calling out day after day after day. So I would check in with him. By this point, he would be sick for several days straight. Then, he would get upset and explode into a rant about how I never give him vacation. He accused me of playing favorites, citing that I allowed certain people to go to Disney last month and someone to go to Europe for a couple of weeks over the summer, and he never gets that same concession. And every time I would ask the same question, why didn't you just ask for the time off? Because it is nonsense. I have my time, I should be able to use it however I want. I agree. So why can't you just do that? Why can't you just say which days you need for vacation? Why must we create conflict? How exactly is trying to skirt a very basic paid time off procedure and suspiciously calling in sick every day for a week easier than just submitting your vacation time like everyone else? I never got a legitimate answer, just indecisiveness about how everything is nonsense and somehow rigged against him. The really unfortunate part is he would have legitimate sick days, but because of how he tried to abuse his sick time, we had to be vigilant if he started to take 2 days in a row, etc. And he always acted like people were being unreasonable with him. Fortunately, he was gone not long after that. Story 3. A few years ago, a taxpayer received a letter saying he owed a lot of money and needed to send in documents. These letters are fully automated and automatically assigned to auditors. This person called me one day very upset, just yelling at me. He wouldn't let me get a word in at all. He hung up the phone, called again, yelled more. He repeated this 3 times. Then I refused to pick up. 52 calls later, security and information technology intercepted and blocked his number. For 3 days, they required me to walk out with a police officer because of his threats. So why did he get a letter? He entered his income incorrectly and added several zeros. All we needed was a copy of his wage and tax statement, which was mentioned in the letter. Story 4. In law school, we did a big mock settlement negotiation. Each person had a goal they wanted and a minimum they would compromise for. I was playing the victim who was going to get a settlement payout. I wanted money, but my assigned minimum was that I was not going to walk away without an apology. That was all I really wanted. The negotiations spiraled and dragged on into a standstill because, despite it costing them nothing, nobody on the other side was willing to give an apology. Everyone was too worried that an apology might look like admitting fault or giving ground. In reality, it would have given them everything they wanted. It was probably one of the most important lessons I learned in law school. Don't get so hung up on the argument and details that you forget that the people you are dealing with are people, usually people who are stressed out and hurting. Story 5. When I graduated high school, I received a scholarship to study abroad in Germany for 1 year and live with a host family. After the initial excitement passed, my host mom was on the phone every week with the organization that sponsored me, complaining about things I did that she didn't like. For example, I threw away school papers in the small receptacle in my bedroom. I never put food trash or anything other than recyclable paper in the bin, which, for the record, was already there when I moved in. The family said I could use their house phone whenever I wanted to call my fellow American friend who was on the same scholarship. Apparently, I was abusing this privilege. These are just a few examples. It was definitely not a language barrier issue since she spoke fluent English. The sponsor threatened to send me home, so I called them and explained that she wasn't communicating her issues to me directly. I was unaware that I was doing anything wrong until my sponsor would tell me so. Thankfully, they finally listened and told my host mom to start talking to me about her issues directly and that they weren't going to take any more phone calls from her. Story 6. My mother-in-law is being really passive-aggressive about not getting to spend time with her grandchildren. She has an autoimmune disease but is still able to keep a really busy schedule in her 60s all over town. She'll passively say to my father-in-law or sister-in-law that she's mad she doesn't get more time with her grandkids. She could just talk to us directly and we could work something out, but hearing it through the grapevine is super annoying. Also, it's 100% her schedule, but she doesn't realize that her schedule doesn't really allow for a lot of grandkids' time. She's usually got meetings or volunteering through most of the day and is upset the babies are asleep by 7:30. Story 7. I was staying with a friend for a month. He has a big house and is basically family, as I am his child's godparent. I live 8,000 miles away in another country, so I wasn't just that guy intruding, but rather someone trying to spend time with my friend and his family. 2 weeks in, he started acting really strange, and it turned out he had all these expectations that he never communicated. He wanted me to take out the trash for them and walk with him and his daughter to and from preschool in the mornings and afternoons. I cooked for them, read to his daughter, and so on. I wasn't a lazy guest. I was like, dude, all you had to do is ask. Turns out he had been stewing on this for weeks. We laughed about it, but it was quite a resolved conversation. Story 8. One time this happened was at work when a coworker made a huge deal about me not sharing information about a project. Instead of just asking me directly, they escalated it to our manager, claiming I was being uncooperative. The reality? They never mentioned they needed help, and I assumed they were good on their end. A simple, "Hey, could you share your notes?" would have solved everything. Instead, it turned into a mess of misunderstanding and unnecessary tension. Story 9. When I was married, my husband was friends with a guy named Jake. We would sometimes hang out with Jake and his family, but I could never seem to fit in no matter how hard I tried. One of Jake's daughters was about 12 years old, named Lace. One day, 3 years after I had met them all, we had been hanging out with the family for the day. On the way home, out of nowhere, my husband absolutely criticized me because it turns out Lace's name was actually Lace, and I had been calling her the wrong name for 3 years, and everybody thought I was a complete fool because of it. Apparently, for 3 years they had been dropping hints that this kid's name was Lace, and I just kept calling her Lacey, and everybody was sick of it and thought I was a complete and utter fool. Like what? 3 years they let this resentment fester. Hi Lace, how's school going? Actually, it's Lace, but school's going well. At no point in the preceding 1,095 days did that super simple conversation happen. Why? We got divorced not too long after that, so I never saw Lace again anyway. Story 10. This is a really dumb one. I work at a food production facility. The company generously provides plastic silverware for the break room. Recently, they have been cracking down on labor costs and product waste because essentially we are losing money due to the economic slump, and they are trying to trim the fat. One day, the plastic silverware ran out in the lunchroom. It ended up being out for a week. A bunch of employees took this as a sign of the company cutting costs and thought they couldn't afford silverware anymore, assuming that we all need to start looking for new jobs as it is going under. Some were claiming that the company doesn't care for the employees and is trying to make the break room inhospitable. No one told the managers we were out. All I did was literally ask the manager why there wasn't silverware in the break room, and he was like, "Oh, you're out? I'll order more." Story 11. Literally this past semester for one of my college courses, my group had to make a presentation for a chapter in the book we had to read. Only we didn't know for certain which chapter we were doing. I suggested just emailing the professor and asking, but the other 3 members were like, No, then he'll know we haven't started it. So I emailed the professor, and he answered with, "You are doing this chapter number." Literally fixed the problem with a single email. Story 12. When someone borrowed my charger, didn't tell me, and I spent an hour tearing my room apart looking for it. All they had to do was ask, but no, chaos first. Story 13. Maybe not exactly the same thing, but my supervisor had an unofficial policy that if you got all your work done and communicated with her, you could leave a little early each day for doctor appointments, other obligations, and so on. It was a level of flexibility and professional trust that really helped with morale. But a couple of people started taking advantage of it and would just leave whenever they felt like it or were done with their work for the day without communicating. which is the only thing our supervisor asked for. So, unfortunately, she had to go back to the official policy, which is everyone has to stay in the office on the clock for their entire shift, and any requests to leave early had to be formally submitted and approved as paid time off days in advance, save for emergencies. Supervisor literally said, "All they had to do was ask me. That was my only rule." Story 14, worked at a health benefits company, and one of the clients was the National Basketball Association. An employee needed to fax eligibility records over a secured line and made a mistake. Instead of asking about why the number didn't match where it was supposed to go, where it did go was a law office. The law office contacted the National Basketball Association, the National Basketball Association lawyered up, and the company got sued. Rightfully so. In hindsight, the law office did a fantastic job handling the situation. Kobe Bryant's social security number just randomly going out where it shouldn't. Oh, and we lost the National Basketball Association as a client. Story 15, working on a group project in college. It was kind of a difficult project because it needed to be built one piece at a time. So Persona did some work and we met up. He was mad we hadn't done anything. We literally couldn't until he was done. So he went and talked to the professor and got special permission to not only leave our group, so now it's 2 people in ours, but join another, so they have 4. He then made it a point to tell us we couldn't use his code. Well, we went to the professor and made our case. Yeah, you can use his code. I just told him that so you two would come talk to me. So he was very upset that we used his code. The real kicker is his code was so bad I had to redo it all anyway. I spent all spring break working on that difficult project. Story 16. I will have students sit for an entire class period doing nothing because they didn't have a pencil. Keep in mind, I have a bin full of pens and pencils that they can help themselves to. I tell them to keep it if they need it. If they ask me for one, I'll usually walk to get it for them 9 out of 10 times. I'll bend over backwards for kids who can't even say good morning back. Story 17. When Elizabeth Holmes founded Theranos with the claims they would be able to do every test on a drop of blood, all her investors just believed her. If anybody had asked, who in the hospital currently does the tests? Let's ask some of them how plausible this is. We would be able to explain the interferences, quality control, and all the other reasons it's unrealistic. There are plenty of large companies that manufacture analyzers, and one of them would have done something similar by now, but still probably using reagents so they can make money. Story 18. I'm a professor. The end-of-course paper is worth a significant part of the grade. It's a case study with a specific format. While I think I've been clear about my expectations, I'm definitely looking for the information to be organized and presented in a specific way. Through the past few months, we've had a few 0-point deliverables for them to submit outlines and working drafts for comment. About half the class hasn't turned in anything. No big deal. It's not for a grade. It's just an opportunity to get some feedback. Up until the week that the papers are due, I'm eager to provide feedback. I very much feel like I'm willing to help them as much as I can up until it's due. All they need to do is ask. Now that the course is about to close, I'm getting the sense that a few students are starting to panic. The papers are due next week, and I've had a few students reach out asking for me to read their 10-plus page drafts and request extensions. I'm definitely not taking time away from my family over the Thanksgiving holiday because they haven't planned ahead. I genuinely don't think I could have made myself any more available leading up to the due date. It's due when it's due. If a student didn't take advantage of the past month and they turn in a poor final product, that's unfortunate. Story 19. We remodeled our back garden about 10 years ago. There were some complaints about planning, but we were found to be within our rights for all the work we wanted to do. The wall between our garden and our neighbors was about 1 meter high at the top of the garden and 1.5 meters high at the bottom. We used to chat with our neighbor over the wall regularly, so I didn't want to change that dynamic. One day, I heard raised voices and went out to find my neighbor arguing with the bricklayer who was rebuilding the wall. When I arrived, the bricklayer asked me how high I wanted the wall. I said, keep it the same height as it was, just not falling down like it was, hoping to get a smile. My neighbor snorted, glared at me, then walked off. Later that afternoon, a handwritten note came through the door telling us to never speak to him again, unless it was through a solicitor. He hasn't spoken to us since. It turns out he wanted to do his garden and make it a bit more private. He wanted a higher wall of 2 meters. If he'd just said that at the time and asked, we'd have built the wall to the height he wanted and just charged for the extra material and work. Instead, he's now a sad, lonely old man who skulks back into the house whenever he sees us.